the captured general. The air in the imperial chamber was thick with arrogance. General Elias Voss, bruised and bloodied, knelt before the towering figure of Governor Cyrus. The alien governor's elongated features curled into a sneer as he studied his captive, his golden robes shimmering under the cold, sterile lights of the hall. Behind him, imperial officers stood in formation, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright contempt. A pair of reptilian guards pressed their rifles against Voss's back, forcing him to stay on his knees. His graying beard was matted with dried blood, his once pristine uniform torn and scorched from battle. But his eyes, steel gray and unwavering, held none of the submission they expected. "You are a relic, human," Cyrus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your kind should have remained hidden on the outskirts of the galaxy. Did you really think your pathetic colony could defy the Galactic Empire?" Voss exhaled slowly, his ribs aching from the beating he had received after his capture. He had led New Terra's defenses against the Empire's incursion, but their orbital bombardment had been swift and merciless. The colony's defenses had crumbled, and his people had been slaughtered or enslaved. The last thing he had seen before losing consciousness was the Imperial fleet blotting out the sky. Now he was paraded before the enemy like a broken trophy. Cyrus turned to the gathered audience. "This is the great human strategist, the so-called Lion of New Terra. Look at him now, on his knees just as all his people should be." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Some officers shook their heads in mock pity. Others chuckled outright. Voss chuckled too. The sound was quiet at first, but it spread through the chamber like a creeping fire. The laughter in the room faltered as some officers exchanged confused glances. Cyrus's sneer twitched in irritation. "What is so amusing?" the governor demanded. Voss lifted his gaze, his lip curling in a half-smile. Despite the pain, despite the humiliation, there was something deeply satisfying about watching the Empire's confidence shift into unease. "You mistake this moment for victory," Voss said, his voice rough but steady. "You think you've crushed us, that we are nothing but scattered remnants of a failed species. But you've made one grave mistake." Cyrus scoffed, folding his arms. "And what mistake is that, old man?" Voss leaned forward slightly, ignoring the guards tightening their grips on their rifles. His eyes, unblinking, locked on his Cyrus's. "You let me live." Silence fell over the chamber. The laughter had vanished. Even the guards, who moments ago had been prepared to shove him back into submission, hesitated. There was something in Voss's voice, something cold, something certain. Cyrus, unwilling to let his authority slip, forced out another smirk. "You overestimate yourself, human. We could execute you at any moment." "But you won't," Voss said, tilting his head. "You need me for your propaganda. You need me to show the galaxy that even the strongest human warriors kneel before your empire. You think you can break my spirit?" He let the words hang in the air before continuing, his voice a quiet promise. "But all you've done is ignite a war you are not prepared to fight." Cyrus's expression faltered for the briefest moment before he scowled. "Enough of this nonsense. Take him to the prison ship. We'll decide later whether you are worth keeping alive." The guards yanked Voss to his feet and dragged him toward the exit. But as they did, he turned his head, ensuring the governor and his officers could hear his final words before disappearing through the doors. "You want war?" he said, his voice like a blade cutting through the air. "We will give you war." And then he was gone. Behind him, the chamber remained silent. The laughter did not return. Humanity unleashed. The transmission had been received. It spread through Earth's remaining strongholds like wildfire. A single sentence, spoken by a weary but defiant prisoner, became the rallying cry of a wounded species. "You want war? We will give you war." In the underground command center of the United Earth Defense Force, UEDF, Supreme Commander Elias Vaughn stood before a grim assembly of officers. They were humanity's last war council, seasoned veterans, cyber warfare tacticians, and leaders of the surviving resistance cells. "Colonel Harlan is alive," Vaughn said, his voice carrying the weight of desperation and determination. "And he's given us our marching orders." The room was silent. The Dominion had crushed Earth's fleets, bombarded cities into ruins, and executed entire populations. Every logical strategist agreed. Humanity had lost. But humans had never fought with logic alone. We were never going to win a conventional war, Vaughn continued. The Dominion fights like an empire, organized, predictable. But us? We were never meant to be an empire. We are survivors, insurgents, predators in the dark. A general, his uniform tattered, nodded grimly. Then we fight like one. Operation Revenant. Humanity's last great weapon had been hidden away for this moment. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, in hangars untouched by the war, the Ghost Fleet was reactivated. These ships, built with stealth technology, adaptive AI, and electronic warfare capabilities, had been a desperate project. Too little, too late, until now. The plan was simple in theory: cripple the Dominion from the shadows. Step 1. Cut the head off. Cyber warfare teams launched attacks against Dominion communication networks, rewriting orders, forging false intelligence, and turning their own AI-controlled fleets against them. The Dominion's logistical chains, once precise and unstoppable, now began to falter. Step 2. Starve the beast. The Dominion's war machine relied on constant resource flow from its occupied worlds. Human saboteurs and resistance fighters, the remnants of scattered forces on occupied planets, began striking at fuel depots, orbital shipyards, and planetary supply routes. On Mars, former civilians used old mining drills to burrow beneath occupation bases, detonating explosives from underground. On Tartarus 6, Dominion slave workers, inspired by the message, revolted, overwhelming their overlords in a brutal uprising. Across the galaxy, Dominion ships began disappearing without a trace. Step 3. Psychological warfare. The Dominion saw humans as primitive, but now they saw ghosts. Hacked Dominion broadcasts showed Earth's history of war, guerrilla tactics from Vietnam, urban warfare in Stalingrad, the bloody tenacity of World War I trench fighters. Military AI inserted fake distress signals into Dominion fleets, luring ships into ambushes or leading them to believe their allies had turned against them. Captured Dominion soldiers were released, but with implants broadcasting their worst fears, sending their paranoia back into their ranks. The Dominion, a race that had ruled through brute force, had never faced an enemy it could not see, could not predict, and they began to fear. The turning point. 2 weeks into Operation Revenant, the Dominion supply routes were in chaos. The Ghost Fleet had crippled 5 major outposts, leaving entire fleets stranded. Several Dominion generals, believing their forces compromised, executed their own officers in paranoia. Then, the first major battle of the war's second phase began. At Krellin Prime, a strategic Dominion stronghold, an entire fleet of seemingly unarmed human cargo ships arrived, broadcasting surrender. The Dominion, eager for a show of strength, allowed them to dock. Then the ships detonated from within, releasing EMP pulses that shut down planetary defenses. Seconds later, stealth bombers decloaked, unleashing orbital strikes. By dawn, Krellin Prime had fallen. The Dominion was reeling. This was not the war they had prepared for. And somewhere in the void, Colonel Harlan, newly freed from captivity, watched the chaos unfold. He smiled. The Empire burns. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, its military doctrine built on overwhelming force, rigid discipline, and absolute control. Against lesser races, this strategy had never failed. But now, the unthinkable was happening. Humanity, beaten and scattered, had not only survived, it had turned the war around, and the Dominion was beginning to break. The rise of the insurgency. The Dominion's control over its occupied worlds had once been unshakable. Now, thanks to Operation Revenant, entire sectors were in open rebellion. On Valkyris 4, human resistance fighters hijacked Dominion supply convoys, using their own logistics against them. Ammunition meant for Dominion forces was redirected to rebels, and ships that were supposed to resupply war fronts instead became floating bombs detonated inside Dominion shipyards. On Tartarus 6, The slave uprising had evolved into full-scale war. Human insurgents, once unarmed workers, now piloted stolen Dominion mechs, using alien weapons against their masters. A single broadcast from an underground leader rang across Dominion networks. "For every world you take from us, we will take 10 from you." The Empire was vast, but it had never faced an enemy like this. The more they crushed the resistance, the more the fire spread. The Ghost Fleet strikes. The Dominion still held numerical and technological superiority, but their strategic weaknesses were becoming obvious. They relied on centralized command. Humans disrupted that. They expected linear, predictable battles. Humans refused to fight that way. They assumed fear would keep their subjects obedient. Humans turned fear against them. At Outpost Xeris 8, a Dominion fleet of 500 warships was stationed to protect one of their most crucial shipyards. They expected an armored assault, something they could repel. Instead, the stars themselves seemed to turn against them. The Ghost Fleet, using cloaking technology and electronic warfare, shut down all Dominion sensors. Dominion ships, confused and blind, began firing at each other, thinking they were under attack from within. Saboteurs, disguised as surrendering humans, infiltrated the command center and disabled the fleet's hyperspace drives, leaving them stranded. Then, the final blow. Human forces deployed a planetary gravity weapon, pulling nearby asteroids into the shipyard, obliterating the installation and 80% of the fleet in a matter of minutes. Word spread. The Dominion was no longer invincible. The fall of Dominion order. With their fleet bleeding and supply chains in ruins, paranoia spread among Dominion leaders. Generals executed their own officers, convinced they had been infiltrated by human spies. Entire planetary governors abandoned their posts, fleeing to the Dominion core worlds, leaving vast stretches of space without leadership. The Zarluth mercenary legions, once the Dominion's most feared enforcers, defected, realizing humanity was paying better and winning. The final act of psychological warfare came from Colonel Jacob Harlan himself. Using Dominion communication channels, he sent out a simple, chilling message. "You thought we were broken. You thought we would beg. You want a war? Now you have it, and we will not stop." The message was broadcast across the entire Dominion network, seen by every soldier, every citizen, and most importantly, Emperor Xerath himself. For the first time in history, the Dominion ruler felt something alien to him. Fear. The final stand. Realizing that total collapse was imminent, Emperor Xerath called for a last desperate stand at Zorthan Prime, the Dominion homeworld. Every remaining fleet, every last soldier, was recalled to defend the throne world at all costs. But humanity did not come for the throne world. They came for the Empire itself. At the same time the Dominion braced for a siege, human forces unleashed their final gambit. Mass hacking of Dominion systems, turning their automated defenses against their own fleets. Biological warfare attacks on Dominion cloning facilities, wiping out their ability to replenish troops. Targeted assassinations of key Dominion leaders, leaving their command structure in chaos. By the time the Dominion realized what was happening, it was too late. Their empire wasn't being conquered. It was being dismantled from the inside out. And at the center of it all, Colonel Harlan watched as the once mighty Dominion crumbled before human ingenuity, resilience, and vengeance. The war was nearly over, but humanity had one last move to make. The fall of the arrogant. The Dominion had ruled for millennia. It had crushed species, raised civilizations, and imposed its will upon the galaxy without opposition. Now, its once mighty empire was in ruins. The war was no longer a contest. It was an execution. The last war council. On board the UEDF flagship Retribution, the leaders of humanity's resistance stood gathered. Supreme Commander Elias Vaughn looked over the war maps, seeing the remnants of the Dominion fleet retreating towards Zorthan Prime, their homeworld. "This is it," Vaughn said. "Their last stronghold. We end them here." Colonel Jacob Harlan, newly freed from Dominion captivity, leaned forward. "They thought they could break us. Instead, we turned their own empire into a war zone. Admiral Kasumi Rice, one of the masterminds behind the Ghost Fleet's campaign, smirked. Now, we finish what they started. But Harlan shook his head. No, he said. We don't just destroy them. We make sure they never rise again. There were no objections. The final battle was at hand. The siege of Zorthan Prime. Dominion forces gathered what remained of their once great military. 1,000 warships, planetary defense grids, and millions of ground troops stood ready to defend their homeworld. But none of it would be enough. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in total silence. The Ghost Fleet, now a vast armada, jammed all Dominion communications, blinding their coordination. Before the Dominion could react, human AI-driven attack drones surged forward in waves, overwhelming outer defenses. Tactical strikes took out planetary shield generators, exposing key cities. Dominion troops, expecting a ground invasion, found instead something far worse. Precision orbital bombardment that left military targets burning, but spared civilian sectors. This was not destruction for its own sake. This was calculated, systematic annihilation of the Dominion's ability to make war. The Dominion forces fought like cornered beasts, but desperation was not a strategy. One by one, their ships were torn apart. Their fleets were reduced to wreckage. By the third day, the Dominion fleet was gone. And then, the final assault began. The fall of the Emperor. With orbital control secured, human strike teams deployed to the Imperial Palace. The once proud center of Dominion rule was now a fortress under siege. Colonel Harlan led the charge, a living symbol of humanity's defiance. He and his forces breached the palace gates, cutting through elite guards, advancing toward the throne room. The Dominion's last hope, Prince Valix, stood waiting with a cadre of warriors. The once arrogant noble, who had mocked humanity, now had desperation in his eyes. You fight without honor, he spat, raising his weapon. Like insects, you crawl through shadows, striking from behind. Harlan shot two of his guards before stepping forward. Honor, he repeated. You bombed our cities, enslaved our people. You wanted a war, Prince. Now you're choking on it. Valix lunged, but Harlan was faster. One precise shot, and the Prince of the Dominion collapsed, gasping his last breath. The throne room doors burst open. Emperor Zirith stood at the top of his throne's grand staircase, watching his empire collapse around him. For the first time in his long rule, he looked afraid. You should not have come this far, he growled. Your kind should have died on your ruined world. Harlan leveled his weapon. You should have studied history. Zirith's claws clenched. What will you do, human? Kill me and take my throne? Harlan chuckled darkly. We don't want your throne. He gestured to the burning city beyond the palace walls. We want you to watch as your empire dies. Then, without another word, he pulled the trigger. The Emperor of the Dominion fell. And with him, so did his empire. The aftermath. The war was over. But humanity did not claim the Dominion. Instead, they ensured it could never rise again. Every Dominion military installation was dismantled or repurposed. Their subject species, once oppressed, were given the means to govern themselves. The Dominion's economy, technology, and war machine were shattered, ensuring they could never rebuild. The galaxy was free of their tyranny, and humanity had proven what the Dominion never believed. They were not weak. They were not broken. They were the storm that had ended an empire. Epilogue, a message to the stars. Months later, as the last Dominion-controlled systems fell into chaos, a single message was broadcast from Earth to the remaining civilizations of the galaxy. Let this be a warning. We are not conquerors. We do not seek war. But if you come for us, if you seek to break us, we will do worse than survive. We will win, and the stars would never forget. Humanity had been underestimated for the last time.